Today we're going to learn about the Chevron factor. So in Sheni, in the second reading of Parshat Shelach, the Torah tells us that the Meraglim, the scouts that Moshe Rabbeinu sent to the land of Canaan, to what will soon become Eretz Hashem, the land of Eretz Yisrael, they set forth. Vayalu vayasuru es haaretz. They went up. Of course, when we go to Eretz Yisrael, we always speak in that kind of terminology. Even in modern times, we call moving to Israel Aliyah. They went up to the land, Mimidbar Tzin, from the Tzin desert, which is kind of like in the northeastern area of the Sinai desert, Ad Rechoiv Levoi Hamas. The Hamas Straits, or passes, is in southern Lebanon. Actually, pretty much into Lebanon. Now that sounds a little bit strange, because how do you go from the southeastern corner of the Sinai desert, right? You're talking about all the way kind of this way in the Sinai desert, and Levoi Hamas is all the way up here. How did they do this? Whether they do a crisscross across Eretz Yisrael? So Rashi explains how this went. He says, Midbar Tzin, from Midbar Tzin ad Rechoiv Levoi Hamas, Holchol bigvuleha be'eirech u'berechav. They went along the outer borders in the length and in the breadth. And Rashi uses an interesting metaphor here. He says, Kamin Gam, like the gamma. You know, the Greek gamma, the point of the Greek gamma is that it's like an L, right? Or like a upside down L, or backwards resh, as our sages put it. And the point is that there's latitude and there's longitude. Rashi explains. Holchu, they went, Ruach Gvul Droimis, Mimiktsea Mizrachis, Ad Miktsea Ma'irav. The first thing they did is they traversed the latitude. In the latitudinally, they went from the eastern corner, the eastern corner on the south, and they went across the south. So they're heading westward, and since they're heading westward, what are they going to reach? If you're east in the Sinai desert and you head west, where are you going to reach? Well, obviously the other side. What's on the other side? No. You're heading west. You're heading west. You're east now, you're heading west. You're going to reach the Mediterranean Sea. Very good, exactly. So they went in Miktsea Ma'irav. They went from the extreme border, the pole on the west. Ad Miktsea Ma'irav. Moshe Tziva Moshe, as Moshe Rabbeinu said. Moshe Rabbeinu said, Aluze Banegev. He said, go up. When you go up, go along the south. So they went along the south, exactly as Moshe Rabbeinu told them. Derech Gvul Droimis Mizrachis, along the southeastern border. So they started off at the southeastern border, and they went all the way across, underneath, on the south of Eretz Yisrael, Ad Shehigiu El Hayam, until they reached the Mediterranean Sea, which is going to be the western border of Israel. Shahayam Hu Gvul Ma'aravi. The Mediterranean Sea is the western border of Israel. Once they reached the coastal area, which would be somewhere around Gaza, or even south of that, from there they turned. They went all along the coastal area. They headed north now. Ad al Sfas Hayam, along the seashore, along the coast. Ad Levoi Hamas, until the pass of Hamas. The pass of Hamas, the pathway of Hamas, is all the way up in the ear of Hamas. The ear of Hamas is actually, I think it's in modern day Syria even, well, near the Syrian-Lebanese border. So you're talking I'm using modern day terminology, of course. This is really where the border of Eretz Yisrael is. Shahu Eitzel Har Ha'ar. This is near Har Ha'ar, which is north of the Hermon. B'miktsaya Ma'aravis Tzofenis. This would be on the extremity of the western, the northwestern area. As explained in the borders of Eretz Yisrael, which we're going to read about much later. So that's where we have this discussion of what Eretz Yisrael looks like and how understanding the contours of Eretz Yisrael and the borders of Eretz Yisrael, we're also able to appreciate exactly the path of the journey that the Meraglim took. Okay, so far everything's good, and they're doing exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu told them, and everything now is plural, right? Vaya'alu, they went up. Vayasuru, they reconnoitered, they checked out. Es haaretz, and smid bartzin, ad l'chev levechamas. Comes Pasuk Chav Beis, and now there's suddenly going to be a little bit of a difference. What happens now? Says the Torah, Vayalu Vanegev. They went up on the Negev. And this is very strange because we already talked about that. We said they Vayalu Vanegev. So why are you saying again Vayalu? It says they went up and Vayalu Vayasura Sa'aretz. And we explained that they went exactly as Moshe Rabbeinu told them along the south. And then it says they went up in the Negev. Vayavayu ad Chevron. And they came to Chevron. V'shomen in Chevron, where they find Achiman, Sheshai, V'salmai. What is so unusual about these people? Why were they so famous? Maybe they wrote Chedusha Torah. They were famous Abanim. No, they were famous bodybuilders. They were very large people, giants. Yelidei Ha'anok. This is the descendant of giants from an ancient race that had lived over there. The Torah comments, V'chevron Sheva Shonim Nivnesa L'fnei Tzoyan. Chevron is built 7 years before the place which is called Tzoan Mitzrayim. So this verse needs a lot of elucidation, and this is the Chevron factor. This little verse contains some very important lessons. Let's take it from the top. First of all, it says, Vayalu Vanegev. They went up in the south. Vayavayu ad Chevron. They came to Chevron. Those 4 words, or those 5 words, seem to contradict what we just read in verse 21. Because in verse 21 it says Kimingam. Kimingam means they traverse the southern border, and then they go up the western area, or the coastal area. But Chevron is not along the coast. Chevron is in the heartland of the south of Eretz Yisrael. But Chevron is north of the border that they travel, the southern border, significantly north of that. So how did they do this? You just told us that they went across the southern border, and then they went up the coastal area, and now you're telling us that they went through the south of Chevron. So this has to be explained. That's the first question that must be explained. Another question is, it says Vayalu Banegev. They went up in the Negev, and that is plural. And then it says Vayavai, not Vayavayu. He came, not they came. So these are 2 major questions that the first 5 words of Pasuk Chav Beis present. So let's go to Rashi, and then we'll see what some of the other Rishonim say. Rashi says, Vayavai ad Chevron, they came to Chevron. Rashi does not even talk about the fact that this seems to be out of sorts with what we read in verse 21. And we'll see in a moment why that is. Vayavai ad Chevron, he says, means Vayavai is in singular, not plural. Everything else is plural. Vayalu, Vayasuru, and then again Vayalu. Everything's plural. Here it goes singular. So he says this is because Kalev Levade Halachsham. This was not everybody's journey. This was Kalev's private journey. And he went there to Chevron, in Ishtatach al Kivrei Avis. And Ishtatach translates as prostrated. Literally, he laid down on the graves of the patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who, of course, are buried in Chevron, in Ma'arat HaMachpelah. And why did he do this? Why wasn't he a team player? Says Rashi, Nisas lechaveirov liyez batzasa. So that Chevron, that Kalev would not be tempted to follow the path of his peers. So there was the machinations. They had these ideas in their mind. They were like thinking things. They were doing their own thing. And Chevron, and he saw that this was getting out of control. They weren't following the advice of Moshe Rabbeinu anymore. They had their own ideas, and it was very tempting. And the peer pressure was intense. And Chevron the Kalev doesn't want to be swept along with that. So therefore, he decided to go to Chevron, to prostrate himself on the grave of the patriarchs. And then, that's how he was saved from Atzasa. How do we know this? Because we take a look in Deuteronomy. And in the first chapter, right away, in the first Parshat, where Moshe Rabbeinu recounts the story of the Meraglim and the tragic consequences. It says over there, "V'loi etein es ha'aretz asher darach ba," and to him will go the land that he walked upon, that he trod upon, which means this is the place that Kalev went. So because Kalev went there, that's why he is going to merit to have that land, and Kalev receives the land of Chevron. Uchsiv, and it's written, "Vayitnu leKalev es Chevron." Kalev is given the land of Chevron. Now, I have to tell you that many of the Rishonim do not agree with Rashi. Rabbeinu Meyuchas says this is not really a question. He says, Kain derech hamikra. That's the manner of Scripture. Sometimes the Scripture speaks to us in the plural tense, and sometimes it reverts to singular tense. It's not a question, he says. It doesn't necessarily indicate something unusual, because that's a manner of speech. Reb Chaim Paltiel, he says, well, there's no way that Chevron could have broken away, Kalev could have broken away from the group for such an extended period of time. So here's what you have to, I think, understand. When we talk about going to Chevron, if you're along the coastal area, you'd have to take a major detour. I don't know how many kilometers it is. I don't know if it's 20 kilometers or 50 kilometers. It's a significant distance from the coast. So Kalev would have had to go a significant distance. He doesn't even have a donkey to ride. It's not a horseback. He has to walk all the way from the coastal area. He has to walk all the way inland to Chevron, and then he's got to go back and join his peers. That's like, that presents a real question. So Reb Chaim Paltiel is of the opinion that they came together. They decided to go inland together. They went to see Chevron. This, after all, was the only city they really knew about from their history. They heard about Beersheba, but there was no landmark in Beersheba. And the Jewish people had left Beersheba some 210 years earlier, 212 years earlier. So what are they going to find? A tent 212 years later? Think about that. Over 2 centuries later. There's no landmark. But a cave is a cave. So they figured that Chevron has a landmark. Chevron didn't change. They went to see Chevron. What happened is, though, says Reb Chaim, when they came to the city, they slipped into the city one at a time. Because the city of Chevron was a fortified city, and they didn't want to make a tumult. So in the hustle and bustle of the main street, which was probably an enormous population of people going through this important megacity in the south of Israel, they slipped in one at a time. Maybe even there was some kind of border passing they had to go through. And therefore, one at a time, they wouldn't be noticeable. So according to Reb Chaim Paltiel, then, the reason that it says Vayalu b'Negev is they did go together. They took a detour in the south, and they came to Ad Chevron. They did come to Chevron, but they came to Chevron one at a time. The Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, says, Lefi Pshuto, if you want to follow Pshuto, and Rashbam oftentimes disagrees with his Zayda, with his Saba Rashi, he says, Vayove kol echad, ve'echad al Chevron, each one came to Chevron, which would probably follow along the same approach of Reb Chaim Paltiel. So Rashi has a very different approach to this. Rashi emphasizes the quixotic journey, the singular journey of Chevron, of Kalev, to Chevron. How Kalev did his own thing. He didn't do what everybody else did. Whereas everybody else continued to go, Kalev did what he did. And Rashi buttresses his approach from what we'll read later on in the book of Devarim. Because over there it says, we're told that Moshe Rabbeinu said, V'lo yetein es ha'aretz asher darach ba. To him he'll get the land that he walked on. Although, if you think about it, ha'aretz asher darach ba doesn't mean the whole way, all the way from the coast. He didn't get a highway. So it can't mean the whole way, right? It means specifically the city of Chevron. So I'm going to suggest to you that actually, even according to Rashi, Kalev did not slip away from everybody for a week and then show up again. This is not, people don't traditionally think this way, but you'll soon see in the way that Rabbi explains it, it almost has to be this way. It's illogical to say that Kalev would have gone away for such a long amount of time and caught up to them. He didn't have a GPS. How's he going to find them? You're talking about a few people walking. It's a big land. Who says there was even a highway over there? They're looking along the coastal plain. And then what he will start asking, did you see a group of 10 spies? 11 spies, my friends, I missed them. Yeah, we came to spy the land. They're just thinking maybe they probably would have taken pains or precautions not to be noticed, not to be seen. How is Kalev going to find them? So the emphasis here is the city of Chevron. And what really sets us off is that Rashi, when he quotes our sages, he says, Kalev levade holach, he says Kalev alone went. This is the Gemara in Saita. But Rashi adds few words. He says, V'nishtatach al kivrei avos. He prostrated himself on the grave of the patriarchs. So that what Kalev did and the others didn't do, according to Rashi, is hishtatchus. That's what Kalev did. What Kalev did is Kalev prostrated himself. So everybody came sightseeing at Chevron. Everybody wanted to see, let's see where the Zaydas got buried. Let's see where our bubbies are. We always heard about this place called Chevron, and it's very, very famous, and this is a Jewish landmark. They all came to check it out. And maybe even Rashi wouldn't disagree with Reb Chaim Paltiel, and maybe even he agrees with Rashbam. But from Rashi's perspective, that's not the emphasis. The emphasis is not that they came sightseeing. On the contrary, the sightseeing doesn't mean anything. That's what they did, Lasuras Haaretz. So they came to see one of the cities. On the contrary, according to Rashi's approach, the emphasis here is that Kalev was mishtateach, that he performed this act of prostration, which we'll explain in a few moments. Now, it's interesting that according to some of the Mefarshim, the city of Chevron was a city that was built up. The city was built up, and it was a city that had fortifications. But the city of Chevron, we hear, is a city, was Nivnas al Tzayan, and we don't have enough time to go through the Rashi today, but Rashi explains in detail that the city of Chevron was built by Chum. It was built for Canaan, and the reason that Chum built it for Canaan is because Chum wanted his son to have a special place. And that means that the Canaanites or Chumites, who are not the indigenous peoples of Eretz Yisrael, came to Israel very early, but not the entirety of the land. They only came to the south of the land. And the Chizkuni tells us that the other lands that they captured from the Semites were weak, the Chumites were brutal and very aggressive, so the Chumites captured the other cities and they didn't bother building fortifications. Many of the other cities were left wide open. It's true, and we read in the Torah, read about the city of Yericho had incredible fortifications, and actually the archaeology indicates the kind of fortifications we talk about. And the same thing is true with some of the other cities that we talk about in the Torah, that they attacked these fortified cities. But many of the other cities were not fortified. So Chevron was more of a formidable city. They went to see the city of Chevron, and then they saw other cities as well. But getting back to our point here, the emphasis is going to be that Kalev did something that the others didn't do. That's the point here. So perhaps this will all become better understood through the lenses of one of the Rebbe Sichos. Even though the Rebbe doesn't address this factor directly, I think that it does answer that question too. If you want to look in the Burim book, page Kuf Tzadik Tes, Siman Zayin, so the Rebbe said, Tzarech Bir. We have to understand. L'shem ma niskar Kalev le'ishtateach al kivri avis. Why did Kalev feel it necessary to go to the Ohel? Why did he have to go to the grave of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov? Kedei shezuchutam tisayeh lo, so that their merit will assist him. Ultimately, Kalev is trying to connect to the neshamas of the patriarchs and matriarchs. Kalev is trying to receive an added sense of intuition, an added sense of spiritual consciousness, an added sense of spiritual clarity, right? That's what Kalev is trying to do. And he does so by being mishtateach, by going to the kever. He's attaching himself to the schus. He's linking up, so to speak, to the spiritual iCloud that's represented by the Avos. He's getting a new download. He's adding, he's augmenting his operational spiritual system. But after all, he was a shliach of Moshe Rabbeinu. Shluchish ladun kamaisei. Shliach of Moshe Rabbeinu. He already had Moshe Rabbeinu's keiches. He wasn't going on his own coattails. He's going on Moshe Rabbeinu's coattails. If he's going on Moshe Rabbeinu's, the infusion of Moshe Rabbeinu, why wouldn't that be sufficient? Madu alei his speaker l'shem kach zechus shel Moshe. Why wasn't the schus of Moshe enough? Moshe Rabbeinu. Oh yes, it's true. It's not Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, but it's Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu has, it would seem, enough of a schus and enough of a spiritual infusion that it should be able to make the job of Chevra, of Kalev, successful. He should be able to overcome by virtue of that schus alone. So why did he have to go to Chevron too? So the Rebbe suggests that the emphasis here is very much on the word of hishtadchut. And he explains. What was the sin of the Meraglim? They got a shlichut, they got a mission, they carried out the mission. The problem with the Meraglim, the chet of the Meraglim was, they actually did not fulfill the mission Moshe Rabbeinu gave them. Well, they did, but they did so using their own intuition, using their own ideas. They did not follow the instruction of Moshe Rabbeinu. They did not follow him in a way of his batlus v'kabbalah sale. They did not nullify themselves to the will of Moshe. They did not say, we are going to be Hasidim. And what Moshe Rabbeinu told us to do, that's what we have to do. And even if to us it seems that there would be a wiser way to do this, we have to follow the instructions of Moshe Rabbeinu. And only when we follow those instructions right, that's when we'll be successful. What did they do instead? Irvu b'shlichazu sichlo ma'ishi. They kind of mixed into the picture their own intelligence, their own rationale, their own decisions. So they weren't doing this in a way of bittul. They weren't doing this in a way of humility and devotion to Moshe. They were carrying out Moshe Rabbeinu's shlichus, but they felt they also had something to say. They also had somebody to contribute. Because Moshe Rabbeinu had set them off on a path, and now they would carry out the shlichus as they would see fit best, rather than the way that Moshe Rabbeinu told them. So now this is a problem. This is a problem. Peer pressure is a very difficult thing. And everybody seems to be caught up in this. When everybody's caught up in doing their own thing, we're doing Moshe Rabbeinu's shlichus, but we're doing it our way. We have the right ideas. I'll give you an example. There was a certain person in the 50s who responded very much to the Rebbe's call of ufaratza, reaching out and engaging with people, of caring, of sharing, of being passionately involved with Yidden who maybe weren't as learned but didn't have the same kind of background. And that's what the Rebbe wanted. But this person did not follow the Shulchan Aruch. He did things which were beyond the pale of the code of Jewish law. So the Rebbe called him in. And the Rebbe said to this fellow, listen, you cannot continue this path. If you want to be my shliach, if you want to follow and you're doing this because I told you to do this, you have to follow the Shulchan Aruch. That's first and foremost. We cannot violate the Shulchan Aruch. So the fellow said, I'm not prepared. I'm not prepared to be so humble. I'm not prepared to follow instructions exactly. I'm going to do my thing. I love your vision. I'm inspired by your call, but I'm going to do it my way. The Rebbe said, you can do whatever you want. It's a free country, but my shliach you won't be. And the Rebbe said, this is where our relationship ends. And the Rebbe ended the relationship. And this person used to come back and try to say l'chaim. They would ignore him. He said, that's it. Once you leave the Shulchan Aruch, once you do things in a way which is beyond the pale of instructions, it doesn't matter if you're inspired by the Rebbe's vision. It doesn't matter if you want to do what Moshe Rabbeinu told you to do. But if you're not following instructions, if you have your own opinion too, then it just doesn't work. So this is the peer pressure that Kalev was under. What was the answer to that? How did he overcome it? The way to avoid this pitfall is al yedei hishtatchus. Hishtatchus al kivrei avos. So this is an ancient term, and it used to be when they would visit the graves of tzaddikim, which is a very, very ancient Jewish practice, as you see, 3,300 years old, going back to Chevron, going back to Kalev. And there's always, traditionally, Jewish people have always been mishtateach al kivrei avos and kivrei tzaddikim, on the graves of ancestry and on the graves of the righteous, that they would actually lay down in the grave. Now, we don't do this anymore today, for a variety of reasons. We don't lay down in the grave. But the concept, there's this conceptual idea of hishtatchus. Hishtatchus is not necessarily a physical posture. Hishtatchus is an idea. Hishtatchus is a concept. So what does hishtatchus mean? Well, let's take a look at it in its most literal iteration. Hishtatchus is a matzav, a situation, shebei hareish v'haregel shavim b'gavayim, that head and feet are equal, because the person is prostrated. It's laid out flat. You lay out flat, head and feet are the same. What does this represent? What does it mean then? What's the point of laying down? Misamelas matzav nafshi. This is emblematic of a consciousness. It's emblematic of an attitude. And the attitude is, the person does not pay attention to his own intelligence, to his own decisions, his own rationale, any more so than he pays attention to koyach ha'maisa, to the ability to simply obey, to follow, to do what you were told. So when a person says, I will do as I am told, well, do as I am told. Doing is doing. But intelligence, rationale, your own ideas, your ability to intuit, well, that's different. That's not simply following instructions. Unless you take your intelligence and you set it down aside and say, well, forget what my intelligence is. In the same way that I will obey cerebrally, I will obey emotionally, I will obey functionally. I will obey. I'm a shliach. I'm a messenger. It's not about my gig. It's not my game. It's not my approach. I have to do what I'm told. And only then can I carry out the shlichus, can I fulfill the mission. So the idea of hishtatchus means a sense of absolute bittul, a matzav, a situation of kabbalas oil muchletas. Using the parlance of Torah, we talk about this idea of kabbalas oil, accepting a yoke. When an ox gets yoked, the ox doesn't have his own ideas. The ox doesn't tell the person who's pushing the plow, you know what, we should go into the next field. I think I want to do a little trot now. And then afterwards, no, it doesn't get to do that. He's yoked. The ox is going to follow the will of the person who's wielding the plow, not his own will. And if the ox is the one deciding, we're in big trouble. So that sometimes we have a nefesh habahamis, have an animal soul like an ox. He's ferocious. He's full of strength. But you have to harness, you have to channel it. You have to yoke him. That's bittul hamachshava ha'atzmis. That means a person is ready to set his own intelligence aside. It doesn't matter if I don't understand. It doesn't matter if it seems to me that we should do things otherwise. I reach a different conclusion. I have to follow the ratzon of the Mishalech. I have to follow the instructions, the will of the one who is sending me. What did Kalev do? He went to prostrate himself. Whether Kalev physically prostrated himself or not is less important than the concept of Ishtatchus. He prostrated himself conceptually. He put himself into a situation where his own intelligence, where his own conclusions were irrelevant, where he said, I need to really be a Rishliach of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the question was, why wasn't the schus of Moshe sufficient? The answer is, it would be sufficient. But once you start to mix your own intelligence, your own decisions in, then you lose that connection to Moshe Rabbeinu. What restored Kalev's connection to Moshe Rabbeinu? What gave him the ability to carry out that shlichus fully, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have wanted him to? The answer was Hishtachos. In order to bring himself to bring himself to a situation of total self-abnegation, to be able to renounce my opinion, my attitude, my approach. A Kabbalah sale shetogin alav, that kind of Kabbalah sale, that kind of absolute acceptance, which shields a person mipnei higrarus achre et atzas chaverei meraglim, than instead being swept along with the ideas and the notions and the concepts that were being articulated by his peers, by the other meraglim. Now, if you take this approach that the Rebbe takes, and you emphasize the word hishtatchus, really it answers many questions. You don't have to say that Rashi argues with Rashbam. That you don't have to say that vayavai means the concept of that they all didn't go to Chevron, which is very hard to understand. How did Kalev break away for so long? Maybe he didn't break away. Reb Chaim Paltiel is not arguing with Rashi, but they went sightseeing. If you go sightseeing to the oil, that's a problem. You're not going. If you're going as a tourist, they had a thing in the New York Times: things to do on the weekend. One of the things to do was make a pilgrimage, go to the Ohel. Pilgrimage, interesting thing. It's this grave site that people come from the whole world. If you come as a tourist to the Ohel, cannot promise you that it's going to be effective. But if you come as a chassid, if you come being mishtateach, if a person comes a way a yid is supposed to come to a oil, and he comes in a way of renunciation, putting himself aside and saying, I wish to fulfill the will of the Moshe of the Dor, that's a whole different story. And here we see that in Rashi. Rashi emphasized the words. When Rashi commented, he didn't say that Kalev went. Rashi went ahead and added the words, Kalev went, Kalev levade halach sham, doesn't say halach lisham, doesn't say went to there. Halach sham, he went there. V'nishtatach, and he prostrated himself. And that was because Kalev understood that as long as he's mixing his own intelligence and has his own ideas, this is never going to work. So Kalev went with that intention, and because Kalev went wholeheartedly and pure-heartedly and sincerely, and he was mishtateach, Kalev was saved. This is the case. This was the example that we were shown 33 centuries ago. My dear friends, this is the case, and this is the example in our day and age as well. That's called the Chevron factor.
Too bad it wasn't an influence on the others.
Listen, I'm sure he tried to influence the others, and unfortunately he was unsuccessful.
So the question is, say what Rashi did he go really alone, or did they